how many people here saw the film Spotlight? I mean, I would think so. Did you, as you were sitting there, did you notice how many times and how central a role the news archive, the morgue, played in that movie? Would that story have been the same? No. How many of you have had, and that was largely a paper archive because of the time period, but how many of you have lost some digital content from your phone, from your computer? It's so easy, and it happens so fast, and sometimes you don't even know that it's happened. The same situation applies to our systems, our content management systems, and the other systems we use for creating and distributing electronic, digital news content today. Little example, right here in our backyard, and glad Tom Moorhover's not here because he accuses me of making him the poster child for our cause. There was a crash, a server crash over in the building. Well, I don't know exactly where the server was, but the Missourian newspaper offices are just across the street, and it's a daily paper that serves the community, has a long history, goes back to the founding of the school. So there was a server crash in 2002, and in a matter of a few seconds, 15 years of news content was obliterated. It was gone irretrievably. Now, part of the problem was that the content was held in an obsolete software system. And I mean, it was really obsolete. It was so obsolete that even if you had the data, you probably couldn't make this thing work again. The company that made it did not have a way to bring this stuff back to life. And so for all intents and purposes, that digital record of Mid-Missouri for those 15 years is still gone. We do have a print version of it, but how many of you have tried to search through a paper archive or microfilm? Anybody want to volunteer for that duty? Right? For better or worse, these digital systems are really great for providing access. They're great for creators, but we haven't quite figured out what to do with them for the long term. One little myth I think I'd like to dispel today: your content management system is not an archive. It never will be an archive. It's not made to be an archive. It's perfectly fine that it's not an archive, but it is not an archive. And you can back it up, and it's still not an archive. I'll tell you a little story where I used to work, the Tucson Citizen. It closed in 2009. Now, here's a nice, I have a visual representation of the morgue, the news library. The physical news library looked like this afterwards. I can't show you, but believe me, the digital archive, you might as well have set a match to this and maybe sprayed water all over it. Because what happened was, and you can go back and look today, is that when they closed the paper, they shut down the servers, they shut down the different indexes and systems, and when they tried to bring them back up, guess what? They were broken. And they've still not been able to fix that. So you don't have those links to photos and videos. The other resources are not connected from so we basically have no idea what that archive originally, or what that newspaper originally looked like. Just no way to go back there and do that. In terms of the values of news archives, Tom Moorhover, my poster child for this, made a statement about it. Obviously, if you don't have an archive in terms of your journalistic content, you're going to suffer. And my belief is that you're also throwing away something that in the future is going to be very valuable to society, and potentially, and this is one of the things that we're working on, is that potentially I think you're also throwing away some money. And publishers, come on, now I got your attention. Don't throw away any money. Catherine.
Right on. So what we're talking about here isn't just the Missourian. It's not just the Tucson Sun. It's a huge problem, and it's one that is system-wide. So we're not looking at single stakeholder problem here. We're looking at multi-stakeholder. It's not just the publishers that are having issues. It's not just the CMS runners, the folks who are doing the platforms. It's not their problem entirely or their solution entirely. And then you've got this whole set of stakeholders over on the side, the libraries, the archives, et cetera, which historically have performed a function of taking care of and archiving and making accessible the news record. And each of these stakeholders, plus others, press associations, et cetera, have some role to play in the crisis that's unfolding, but it is a crisis. And it's not just two newspapers out there that have had this kind of failure. It's all kinds of newspapers, and it's a quiet failure. So unlike physical archives where you can actually look at it and go, oh, okay, so we've lost half of our work here to whatever disaster, you don't know that it's gone. You don't know that it's going until it's already happened. And so many, many newspapers, many, many news sources have lost content that we don't know about right now, and it is this very quietly unfolding crisis that really starts to matter when we try to piece together history. Or try to understand the legacy of particular journalistic moves, business model changes. I mean, if there have been any of those in the last, say, 15 years, just a few. It'd be nice to be able to actually go back and look at that and analyze that and say, oh, hey, look at this experiment over here, look at this innovation over here, look at how those wound up leading to the type of environment that we have today. We aren't going to have that kind of record because of what's happening today, again, quietly and behind the scenes. So Edward and I are part of a team effort that, again, is trying to bring together not just the journalists, not just the librarians and archivists who used to take care of this in a print world, and not just the platforms, but all of those folks together, plus folks who need to use this content, the genealogists and the researchers alike, to figure out how to mend the relationship breaks and the technological issues that are here, both in the social and technological infrastructure.
So you may recognize this room. Room was a little newer. This was in 2011. Probably the first such widespread gathering that included the news industry, because we had been talking about this at least since 2009, Library of Congress having conversations about it. But one of the things that we're conscious of here at the journalism school is that you got to have all the people at the table. And guess what? The people with the content, they weren't at the table.
Nope.
And they're hard to get to the table.
They had other things to worry about, like surviving.
Yeah. Keeping the lights on. It's the expression, trying to sell insurance to a drowning person.
That's right.
Sometimes that's the position we're in. And we're trying to get ahead of that so that we catch them before they jump in the water, okay? Maybe too late. But there's some group of publishers, editors, and on the left there, Mark Wilson from townnews.com, who's really been an advocate for us, one of our champions. He runs townnews.com, which is a big content management system. They've got about almost 2,000 newspapers in the United States. And he's telling me that just their e-content pages, right now they're losing 2.4 million pages a year. This was the distribution of attendees to Dodging the Memory Hole in 2014. We realized that we need more journalists and more IT people to be joining with us in this. And we've made efforts to reach out to those communities.
So the purpose of the 2014 meeting, which again took place here, was to bring all the stakeholders together and start to talk about the problem area. So establishing that there is a problem, and starting to talk about some ways of moving forward to do something about it. Edward had generous funding, Edward and RJI had generous funding from the Mizzou Advantage Fund, which is a local foundation fund that allowed that gathering to take place. Simultaneously, I run a small nonprofit that builds bridges basically between libraries, archives, and museums. I'm fighting for the survival of an almost extinct species that doesn't realize it's going extinct, and is now in competition with groups like Google. And so my work dovetailed into Edward's in part because I got an NEH award to host a gathering that was very synergistic. And so we worked together on these applications, and we had the funding for 2 events. And we got together and we said, all right, so we could just host 2 events, and that'd be great. Bring the stakeholders together, have these conversations, start to build relationships. But could we do more? And so what we decided is that the real challenge from the 2014 event, where we would come together and start to build that foundation for collaboration, and the 2015 event, which we were going to hold in Charlotte, North Carolina, it happened that May, or this past May, was to turn potential energy, which we knew we could generate. I mean, we had a bunch of smart people coming together into a room. We knew we could generate a lot of passion, a lot of interest, a lot of enthusiasm. How do you take that potential energy and turn it kinetic when all of us were going to go back to our daily lives? And so what we decided is, well, we can force collaboration by moving from taking action to jumping in. And so what I did was I stood here at the end of the event, and I said, all right, so here are some of the ideas that we've discussed. And I put them up on a slide, and I said, all right, who's going to volunteer? And I used peer pressure to elicit from the audience actual contributions that promised on video that they would do something about these different problem areas. And we wound up with 6 of these. So one of them was around an environmental scan to understand better what is actually happening both on the news side and on the library and archive side. How much are we losing? Can we start to really chart that out and do it in a state-by-state or national way? Others looked at workflows. So what do we already have existing technologically that could be put to work on this space?
But I think it's important, and you got to watch this one because she will call you out and make you do things, that's great. That's her role. But prior to that, in the groups that we had together, we had people agreeing, getting consensus about what are our priorities, and how important is this really. And that, when you say that, then you're in a position where somebody can call you and say, well then, okay.
Your turn.
You got to do something.
So the challenge that we were working with was how do you move from act to impact? And for both Edward and I, we come from a history that is overlaid with some social movement kind of work. And for me, one of the things that I wanted to bring to this multi-stakeholder problem was an understanding of what we know right now from sociology, that's my background, what we know from social movements, from various efforts, both on the business side and on the public good side, to help guide the way we collaborate. So what we're going to turn to here at the end of this conversation is a particular model, and this is just one model. It's a buzzword right now. This really became popular around 2011. And right now, this is the thing if you're working in social collaboration spaces on environmental issues or on reducing teen pregnancy or name your issue. There are lots and lots of collective impact issues going on.
Fortunately, it actually works.
That's why there are a lot of these going on. And it's not a magic bullet. It's not something that was invented in 2011. It is a buzzword that has been applied to it. It's a packaging of social methodologies for broad-scale collaborations, which happen, again, both on the business side and on the public good side. And so some of the things that we've tried to bring, recognizing that we only have limited funding, limited ability to bring people together, is some of the basic tenets of collective impact methodology. And the thing that really differentiates it from a lot of other things are these 5 pieces, and these 5 pieces are key in multi-stakeholder initiatives, which is what we're talking about when we're talking about trying to preserve the news, or archive the news, or have this kind of record. So everybody has to come together from all of these different stakeholder perspectives and agree on a common agenda. This is not unlike what we were just hearing a couple of minutes ago about the business world and trying to bring together newspapers from lots of different geographical regions to say, okay, what's our common agenda and how are we going to move that forward? So establishing that common agenda and making it not a platitude, platitudes don't work, but something that you can actually measure progress towards is really crucial here. And then establishing, number two, the shared management systems that you need, or shared measurement systems that you need in order to really manage the collaboration and show progress and keep buy-in on the parts of all the different people that are engaged in something like this. Then the third magic bullet in a collective impact kind of environment is to have these mutually reinforcing activities. So each of the stakeholders are going to go back. So to take our very concrete example of these folks who have been engaged in this digital news, how do we make it persist over time issue, each of us go back to our normal day-to-day lives. The news editors that we had from Dallas Morning News and other places went back to their daily lives. I went back to my daily life working with libraries, archives, museums. We had educators in the room. We had press associations in the room.
I think a good example is Ben Welsh from the Los Angeles Times.
Fabulous.
Who got together at the conference with Herbert von der Sampel. They looked at the situation and they built a tool, a plugin for WordPress that can help you archive your WordPress site.
Yep. And so on each of these fronts, we're making progress. And our progress, instead of competing, which is what often happens with innovative work, so especially when you're funding lots of innovation, which does happen, especially on the academic side of the realm, one of the things that happens is all of those innovations are kind of in competition with each other. And the only way that one can emerge is if there is a network, not just a bright light bulb that goes off over somebody's head, but an actual network to distribute and really incorporate that innovation into a normal workflow. And so the mutually reinforcing activities, really emphasizing the ways that the things that Ben is doing implicate others within the cycle has been really important to this. Other things that are, just to breeze through, continuous communication. If you don't have continuous communication between a multi-stakeholder effort, then nothing's going to happen. And this can mean, lots of meetings, hopefully not lots of meetings that don't actually make progress, and that's where the real key comes in. And then finally, you've got to have backbone support. Somebody's got to have their eye on the collaboration as their purpose. Or else that collaboration is not going to be healthy, it's not going to flourish, it's going to get misdirected and it's going to get tabled and moved to the background.
So we're trying to take on some of that role, but
exactly.
we're looking for help.
We're looking for lots of help.
For that backbone.
Right. So we're two relatively small organizational pods that are trying to help bridge a lot of different players into a set of relationships that are uncomfortable. When you talk about multi-stakeholder initiatives, especially in something as fraught as journalism and the changing industries and the changing technologies and everything else that we're all dealing with, it requires us to really build bridges and keep those communication lines open so that as each one of our stakeholder communities starts to make progress towards goals, as each one of our stakeholder communities starts to realize, okay, so now we've got AMPs. What do we do with that? What does that mean within this context? Can we take that AMP and start to save it? Is there a conduit for that? As these conversations are going on, one of the powerful things that happens is the innovations start to be adopted not just by one stakeholder group, but by all of the stakeholder groups simultaneously. And that winds up reinforcing the activities that are at hand. And so a lot of what we're trying to do right now is set the stage for that to happen. And when that happens, what you get is this kind of cascading levels of collaboration is what they call it in collective impact. And so you have, a backbone. It doesn't have to be an organization. It can be a person, a facilitator. It can be a group. It doesn't have to be, a standalone. But you have this networking backbone that helps to keep all of these players in check and in concert with one another as they're doing their daily jobs, as they're doing their specialized projects. And then eventually you get all of this cascade of work that's going on the periphery that winds up contributing back to the overall initiative. And so in terms of collaboration, we don't get to have a whole room full of superheroes. If we did, maybe we could do things things a little bit differently, and we could just
We have
Superman
them
and
right
Wonder
here.
Woman yeah,
No,
that's us.
Have the superhero. We can do it.
Right, but since we don't have the magical uniforms and the ability to transform ourselves into these key figures that can move and change things, we really have to bond together and figure out ways to make it worth all of our while to stay engaged so that the historical record actually does exist, so that we do have the ability, as Edward started this conversation, when something like Spotlight happens, we're able to go back and actually see the history of events as journalism has shown it as a rough draft of history. Anything else?
One more slide.
Oh, do we? Sorry.
So
Yes, we do.
our organizations, JDNA, which is based here at RJI, and Educopia Institute. It's been a really fruitful collaboration. Look forward to doing much more. And I would emphasize, I do think this room is full of people who can be our champions, who can bring this message and build awareness. We're at that stage now where I think this community can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we do have one quick question here. So,
Hi, guys. So this seems like an infinitely solvable problem. There are 2 companies in the world, 3 companies in the world, 4 companies in the world. This is a storage issue. At the end of the day, we need to store this stuff. So what I want to know is, like, how are you approaching Amazon, Microsoft, and Google?
With open arms. With open arms.
So, but-
Or maybe it's more like
Yeah, more on our knees. Yeah.
So understanding that
Right.
the cloud is not free.
It's actually not just storage. So
So
yeah, can I give you
I
the
would-
2-second spiel
Sure.
on why it's not just storage? So it's a combination of things. You can store everything, and that's great, but we've got too much stuff. So storage doesn't work. What we have to have is good metadata and good ability to actually locate those things that we've stored, good ability to tell what file formats they're in so that we can migrate them forward as we need to, or build emulation tools that can actually render them. You think about how much has gone obsolete. I mean, just technological
Technology,
obsolescence over the course of the last 15 years, and then look at the speed of that. And there are lots of computer scientists who've done these beautiful graphs on how quickly it
Right.
hasn't been something where it started off fast and then we plateaued.
No.
It has moved from almost a plateau up exponentially, where we're just moving like this.
So the New York
it's
Times
not
is
just storage.
New York Times is storing I don't know how much content from the 90s that is no longer accessible because it's an HTML2 or 3. Just as an example.
That would take a
So
lot
you
of
can
work
store
I want
it.
to go back
move forward.
This is a storage issue that companies like Amazon, Google, and Microsoft have solved. They've got it solved. We've got to get this partnership going, because you're right, we're losing our digital past.
The partnership does need to be there, but I will again challenge that statement that it has been solved. It has not been solved, and internationally it hasn't been solved. We've been working with the Library of Congress, with the British Library.
Internet Archive is part of
Internet
this.
Archive, there's a huge international movement around even just the basics of web archiving, like what Internet Archive does,
Since
and
we-
even that isn't solved. So
Since
we've got big problems to solve.
since Bill's from Microsoft and since Nick's from Google,
let's work together.
I think we could have some substantive conversations today.
Over the
I have
break.
to take a break, so I think I'm going to go ahead and do that. But if you do have a question, please ask. And thank you guys very
Thank
much.
you.
Their contact information up on the screen.